order Daniel Kozinski to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Vaz, for calling me in this debate, and it's a pleasure to be serving under your chairmanship. A debate on pressing the British government to finally recognise the sovereignty of Western Sahara as being part of the Kingdom of Morocco. Morocco, of course, is our second oldest ally, a very reliable partner, and one that is seeking our support to recognise Western Sahara as being a part of their kingdom. The United States of America, Israel, two of our most important allies, have recognised sovereignty of Western Sahara as being Moroccan, and some of our other allies, Spain, the former colonial power of Western Sahara, France, Netherlands, Germany, and others, all recognise that the autonomy proposals that the Moroccan government is putting forward for Western Sahara are the best option going forward. And yet, we in the United Kingdom are sitting on the fence. I intend to try to analyse during the course of this debate why Morocco is such an important strategic partner for the United Kingdom, and ultimately urge my own government to finally get off the fence and recognise the sovereignty of Western Sahara as being Moroccan, or run the risk of a major miscalculation in our geopolitical strategic approach, not only to Morocco, but the whole of North Africa. I will.
With interest to a case my honourable friend is making, he essentially seems to be saying because Morocco is important to us, we should recognise that Western Sahara should be part of Morocco. Isn't it better to say Morocco is important to us, so are the people of Western Sahara, they should be allowed the self-determination which many other people are allowed?
Well, I've given way to my honourable friend out of deference to the fact that he's leader of the House. I will not be giving way to many interventions because I've got an awful lot to say in the limited time that I have, and I will come on to the point that he has so eloquently made later on in my speech. There are 22 members of the Arab League, and I have visited 18 members of the Arab League during the course of being a member of Parliament and previously in commerce, in exports. And of course, when one travels across members of the Arab League, one comes across huge, vast differences between those countries, whether it's Mauritania on the one hand, which I have visited on 3 occasions, or the United Arab Emirates. Huge differences between these Arab nations, many of whom are our neighbours. But I've spent the last 3 years writing a book on emotional intelligence in politics. And a key strand of emotional intelligence, as the Honourable Lady will know, a key strand that runs through the whole concept of emotional intelligence is interdependence. That is a word that keeps coming back when one studies the concept of emotional intelligence. And I intend to highlight during the course of this debate the interdependence that we have with the Kingdom of Morocco. Out of 22, this is arguably the best Arab country to engage with. It's the most progressive society, and one, most importantly, that shares our values. A reliable strategic partner which pursues all the attributes of a modern democracy. We can and must build strong commercial, political, and security links with this nation. But we are in the process of jeopardizing our potential with Rabat and falling behind our competitors, the United States of America, Germany, Spain, and others, as a result of our refusal to understand, from an emotionally intelligent perspective, the huge importance that Morocco attaches to this issue. So, Mrs. Vaz, let me come on in the first part of my speech to examining why I feel so strongly about Morocco No, I won't give way at the moment. Women's rights. I'm going to talk about women's rights, religious rights, and the rule of law. Protection for citizens under the Constitution. When I visited Morocco, I have seen at first hand the extraordinary protection of religious minorities which exists within Morocco. I've been visiting this country for many years, and I've seen multi-faith, multicultural, and an inclusive society. I've visited many mosques, synagogues, and churches during my visits in Morocco. And of course, John Paul II visited Morocco in August of 1985 when he was hosted by King Hassan, the first visit by the Polish Pope to any Muslim nation took place in 1985 to Morocco. And Pope Francis visited in 2019, and during that visit praised King Mohammed VI's interfaith dialogue. And I pay tribute to the leadership and vision of His Majesty Mohammed VI in the way that he pursues interfaith dialogue throughout his whole nation. And it's not just interfaith dialogue between Jews and Christians and Muslims in Morocco, but even more importantly, the work that the King Mohammed VI interfaith dialogue plays with sub-Saharan Africa and supporting nations bordering Morocco in trying to deal with some of the ethnic and religious tensions which have so blighted sub-Saharan Africa and caused so much instability in the region. Mohammed V, during the Second World War, was pressurized by Vichy France and by Nazi Germany to expel all the Jews from Morocco. And I know that there are honourable members in this House with family links to Morocco. And Mohammed V came under huge pressure by Vichy to do what some European countries did, which is to shepherd their Jewish population into the clutches of the Vichy regime or to Germany, and ultimately we all know what happened to those Jewish people who were sent to Auschwitz. I will give way, of course.
You mentioned members of this House who have family connections to Morocco. So would you agree that the very fact that my late great-uncle was the mayor of Tangier, a Jewish mayor, during the Second World War, proves the point that he's making?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I'm very aware during our discussions of his family connections with Tangiers. And yes, I very much pay tribute to the honourable gentleman and his ancestors and relatives who played such a critical role in Morocco at a particularly difficult time. But Mohammed V, in his response to Vichy and in response to Adolf Hitler, said, "There are no Jews, there are no Muslims, there are only Moroccans." And he refused to comply with the diktat of Pétain and Hitler, and he refused to cave in to those demands. And I think that's testimony to the way in which the royal family in the Kingdom of Morocco protects all religious minorities. In fact, I heard from one journalist that the late Yitzhak Rabin, the late Israeli Prime Minister, was quoted that when he had problems and difficulties with the Moroccan Jewish population, he sought the advice and support of the late King Hassan, who had such close links with that diaspora within his own kingdom. Secondly, women's rights. During my many visits to Morocco, I have met with many women who I feel are far more empowered in Morocco than in many other Arab nations. And having met many female journalists, civil engineers, women who work in construction, female politicians, female diplomats, one gets the impression, Mrs. Vaz, that Morocco, out of all of the members of the Arab League, understands and recognizes that they will only become a true modern society if women are empowered and supported, not only through the education system, but for them to be able to reach the very top of all sectors of society and economy, including those which have historically been dominated by males. And finally, democracy. On my many visits to Morocco, I have witnessed and experienced what I perceive to be a greater freedom of the press than I have come across in any other Arab nation. A greater protection of citizens under the Constitution. A genuine parliament, a genuine system of checks and balances, and a genuine power of the opposition. And having spoken to many opposition MPs in Morocco, one gets the sense that this is a genuine, thriving democracy where the rule of law is protected and people can debate and challenge one another in the most robust way without fear of retribution. Now, the key issue facing Britain today, Mrs. Vaz, I would argue that the key issue facing Britain today in the Middle East and North Africa is the growing spread of the malign Iranian influence across the Middle East and North Africa. This evil, despotic regime, which came about after the fall of the Shah in 1979, the mullahs that control Iran, is one of the, and I have visited Tehran when I was on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, this is one of the most dangerous, violent, authoritarian regimes within our region. They suppress their own people. They abuse their own people. They throw gay people off buildings. They throw gay people off buildings, Mrs. Vaz. This is a very dangerous country, and their influence and malign is spreading across the whole of the region. Just to mention very briefly Bahrain, 2011, and the allegations of Iranian influence in the disturbances and difficulties that Bahrain faced in 2011. They filled the void in Iraq, which we created, which Mr. Blair helped to create in the second invasion of Iraq. And they are growing in their malign influence within Iraq. Syria, our miscalculations again over Syria have given the Iranians the ability to enter that country. Their support for Hezbollah in Lebanon, their support for Hamas, their support for the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and their influence is extending to North Africa, Libya, and Algeria through their support of the Polisario movement. Contrast that with Morocco, Mrs. Vaz. Morocco, a thriving democracy, has massive effort when I went to Morocco to stem the flow of illegal migration to Europe. And I met with many officials during my visit in Morocco and heard how they have managed to prevent over 300,000 illegal crossings into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta and to the Canary Islands. Bearing in mind how we are getting increasingly agitated and frustrated about the illegal migration operating in the English Channel, I think we have to pay tribute to the extraordinary support and vision that Morocco has in policing its own borders and making sure that illegal migration does not end up in Europe and ultimately through Europe to the United Kingdom. At a time also with restriction in the Red Sea and ultimately the Suez Canal as a result of the conduct of the Houthi rebels, the waterway around the Moroccan coastline will be even more important for our security and defence capability. Of course, there are huge commercial opportunities, and between 700,000 and 1 million British tourists visit Morocco every year. We also have a company, X-Links, and the CEO of that company is Sir David Lewis. X-Links, Mrs. Vaz, a company that is seeking to export green energy from Morocco using solar and wind power in Morocco funneling it under an undersea cable to Britain, that is the aspiration which could ultimately lead to 8% of British energy requirements being provided by Morocco through green energy. Now, coming on to Western Sahara itself, Mrs. Vaz, I visited Western Sahara earlier this year, and I visited Laayoune and Dakhla with General Sir Simon Mayle. We spent a week together in Dakhla and in the area itself. And of course, the highlight of our visit was the meeting with the Foreign Minister of Morocco, Nasser Bourita, where we had an hour and a half with the Foreign Secretary. Instinctively, when we started to talk to him, and of course I'm not going to reveal the intricate discussions that we had with the Moroccan Secretary of State, is the Honourable Gentleman?
Yes, he doesn't need to go into the detail because we can read about them in the press release that the Moroccan government released after his meeting with the Foreign Minister. I've just found it online. I'm not sure if I caught him at the beginning. His trip was paid for by the Embassy of Morocco to the United Kingdom, wasn't it? And it's registered in his register of interests.
Yes, that's why I've just stated I visited the Kingdom of Morocco on an official visit, and it is registered in the Register of Members' Interests. That is correct, yes. Yes, I will stick to the motion, but I was trying, Mrs. Vaz, to give an explanation about why I feel so strongly that Morocco is a reliable partner for the United Kingdom. And I'm not quite sure what the point the Honourable Gentleman is trying to make. Yes, we do go overseas on visits where we are trying to understand our understanding about other nations. And of course, we do not have a budget in the House of Commons to pay for those visits, and we are guests of the foreign country, which is all registered in the Register of Members' Interests. During our visit to Morocco, we had a discussion with the British ambassador on the telephone, a very unsatisfactory one, in my view, because the British ambassador, again, like on so many other occasions, has tried to indicate that we cannot recognize Western Sahara because somehow it will impinge or affect our relationship with our own overseas territories, and particularly with the Falkland Islands. And yet, when I pressed the British ambassador to explain why and how this could be the case, no satisfactory response was forthcoming. So I would like to seek clarification from the Minister on this point. Is it the fact that we cannot recognise Western Sahara as being Moroccan because there is some legal or constitutional technical difficulty that may affect our relationship with our overseas territories? I can't quite see that, as France also, who is in the process of recognising this issue, also has overseas territories. I would be very grateful if the Minister could explain that point to me when he is speaking. We need to recognise Western Sahara, as Israel and America has done, or at the very least to follow Spain, the former colonial power, Germany and France, in recognising that the autonomy proposals are the only way forward. Now, during my visit to Dakhla, I mentioned women's rights, but where we had the opportunity of visiting the new port that was being constructed in Western Sahara, and I had the opportunity of speaking to Nisreen Yuzi, Mrs. Nisreen Yuzi, who is the lady who runs 1,600 engineers and construction workers on this port. It's going to be an extremely important link, not just for Morocco, but also the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, Niger, Chad, Mali, and many other countries. And one way we can deal with illegal immigration in Europe and support Morocco is through a program of support for illegal migrants, which I saw at first hand in Dakhla, how the Moroccan government are helping illegal migrants to settle there in Morocco, train them and give them opportunities. Now I'd like to come on to the Abraham Accords. Of course, only 4 Arab nations have signed the Abraham Accords. And the first contact between the Egyptians and the Israelis in the 1970s was brokered by Rabat. And that led to Sadat's visit to Israel and ultimately the peace accord. And the late King Hassan hosted a World Economic Forum in 1994 where he invited Israelis and Palestinians to Casablanca for their first joint session at an international conference. Professor Mark Weller, who is the chair of the International Law and International Constitutional Studies at Cambridge University, Professor Mark Weller from Cambridge University, has submitted a report to the Foreign Office. He has been commissioned to evaluate this concept of why the United Kingdom may find it difficult to recognize Western Sahara, bearing in mind the intricate relationship we have with our overseas territories. And I have met with Professor Mark Weller here in the House of Commons over the last few weeks on 2 separate occasions. He has submitted a report to the Foreign Office 3 weeks ago. I'd be very grateful if the Minister would, in his speech, recognise whether or not that report has been received, and in fact whether or not his officials are briefing him on that report. But let's not forget that Professor Mark Weller, Chair of International Law and International Constitutional Studies, is one of the leading academics in this country on international law and working in this sphere that I am pressing the Minister on directly. And he says that when he took on the commission, he found it a rather potentially daunting prospect. And yet, after the research he has done, he has come to the conclusion that by recognizing Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara, and indeed recognizing their autonomy proposals, it would actually strengthen our relationship with our overseas territories and with the Falkland Islands. So Professor Mark Weller from Cambridge University is saying the direct opposite of what we are hearing from our own ambassador in Morocco. During my visit to Western Sahara, Mrs. Vaz, I'd like you to know that we came across representatives of 30 consulates who have set up, 30 countries who have set up consulates in Dakhla, and over 90 countries around the world have recognized Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara. I will give way.
I thank the member for giving way. Just to ask, in his obviously detailed researches, did he have a chance to meet the Polisario, and has he visited the refugee camps in Algeria?
Well, I was rather suspecting the right honourable gentleman would ask that question, and I'm just coming on to highlighting that during the wind-up of my speech. I have not been as yet to the Tindouf camp in Algeria, where the Polisario are, but I have received allegations from various friends in the Moroccan Parliament, allegations, very serious allegations, and I'm glad the right honourable gentleman has referred to the Tindouf camp, because we have received very serious allegations of the promotion of terrorism within the Tindouf camp. And we have received transcripts of audio discussions from the Tindouf camp where various members of the Polisario Front are indeed urging young female fighters to plant bombs in Dakhla and to try to murder their way back to the Western Sahara. So yes, that is a great concern. And if it's true, Mrs. Vaz, I would strongly urge the Minister to take this issue up with his Algerian counterpart and indeed to try to seek the veracity of that situation. We here in the United Kingdom have had to deal with terrorism ourselves, have we not, during the course of our lifetime? We've experienced bombings ourselves in this country by the IRA. We have experienced ourselves innocent men, women and children being murdered and bombed in Manchester, London and other places. Indeed, the leader of my party there was an attempt to assassinate her in the Brighton bombings, in the Brighton hotel bombing. So we, of all countries, should recognize the difficulties that Morocco is facing if these allegations are correct, and if it is true that the Tindouf camp is still being used by Polisario as a hotbed to promote terrorist activities across the border in Morocco. And finally, Mrs. Vaz, there are allegations from even Amnesty International, which I'm sure the right honourable gentleman respects and recognises, but I will be putting these allegations into the library of the House of Commons, but we've also received allegations of human rights abuses in the Tindouf camps by organisations such as Amnesty International. So that's an issue which I'd like the Minister to take on board. Mrs. Vaz, I'd like to end by saying that I hope, and forgive me for talking about Morocco in this debate as well, rather than just Western Sahara. I don't think we can discount why and how certain parliamentarians have so much confidence in Morocco when discussing Western Sahara, because of the strategic bilateral relationship we are creating with this country. And may I just also pay tribute to the Moroccan ambassador, who I think works tirelessly and very effectively on behalf of his nation in trying to educate us parliamentarians about the Moroccan perspective. I recognise and understand that there are other honourable members with different views to my own, and I'm sure we will be able to hear their views later on in this debate. But from my perspective, I'd like the Minister to realise and recognise that in the remaining time that we have in government, however short or long that is, this issue is not going to go away. We are falling behind our main competitors, such as Spain, France, Germany and America. And unless this issue is resolved satisfactorily for the Moroccans, we will be jeopardising our relationship with them unless we recognise Western Sahara. Thank you.
So I expect to take wind-ups at about 10:28. And just to remind members to refer to their entry in the members' register at the start of the debate. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, and I thank the member for Shrewsbury for obtaining the debate that we're having today, and I think we should also put on record our thanks to the Library for a very good briefing they've done on the situation of the Western Sahara. And I listened very carefully to what the member for Shrewsbury had to say. It's unfortunate that the first 21 minutes of his debate, his speech, were taken up with talking about Morocco and barely mentioned the issue of the legality of the occupation of the Western Sahara by Morocco, because that is what the debate is entitled, and that is the area that we should be talking about. I first raised the issue of the occupation of the Western Sahara in this House in 1984, and I have had the good fortune to visit the refugee camps in Algeria on 2 occasions, to visit the part of Western Sahara that is controlled by the Sahrawi people, a small part of it, near the border with Mauritania. I've also visited the occupied territories, and I've also visited Morocco and met many shades of opinion, both within the Polisario and within Morocco itself. And I have done my best to take a view on the situation which is based on the history of it. The West Sahara was occupied by Spain. It was a Spanish colony, and on the return of democracy in Spain in the 1970s, Spain withdrew from the Western Sahara. The United Nations General Assembly requested that as a process of decolonization, the people of the Western Sahara, the Sahrawi people, should have the opportunity to decide their own future, a choice they could make. And the choices have now come down to the 3 options that have been put, and I'll come back to that in a moment, between independence, autonomy, or incorporation within Morocco. And I think that we have to recognise that if we just say, as the member appears to be saying, that Morocco's illegal occupation of Western Sahara should now be confirmed and condoned, and we should trade with Morocco absolutely normally as though nothing had happened in the Western Sahara, then we're failing in our duties in international law. This issue was taken to the International Court of Justice in the 1970s. An advisory opinion was issued which requires the operation of a referendum for the people of the Western Sahara, and that referendum has never taken place. MINURSO was established by the United Nations in order to ensure that there was a peaceful future for the people of the Western Sahara. There has been conflict in the past, and there's a danger that conflict will return. And the member refers to issues surrounding Northern Ireland, other issues in his speech. Surely, the way to avoid a conflict in the future is look at the heart of the issue and deal with it in a peaceful way, which is where the referendum comes in. The referendum has not happened. The UN representatives have tried very hard over many years to get agreement on what an electoral roll would look like, who could vote on the future of the Western Sahara. For example, the people in the refugee camps in Tindouf and the Western Sahara diaspora, as well as the Sahrawi people within Western Sahara itself. And so I would hope that the UK government's position will be one of recognising the importance of international law in this respect and recognising the rights of the people of the Western Sahara to decide their own future. The member for Shrewsbury effectively is denying the Sahrawi people any rights whatsoever. He's saying that the occupation of the Western Sahara by Morocco on the departure of Spain should now be just accepted as a done deal. You could do, of course, yes.
So, in his logic, he is saying that the United States of America, Israel, Germany, Spain, France, the Netherlands are all wrong, and they are all making the wrong decision to recognise that the autonomy proposals by the Kingdom of Morocco are not the correct solution going forward. Is he saying that all of those NATO allies of ours are wrong?
What I'm saying is international law should come first, and therefore the decision by Donald Trump, when he was the previously President of the United States, to recognise Moroccan occupation, which very few other countries have done, is a very backward step for international law, and obviously one that is going to make a lot of people, particularly Sahrawi people, extremely angry because they see no right of representation of themselves in this. My argument is that the International Court of Justice advisory opinion was under a process of decolonisation, and this issue has been taken to the Decolonisation Committee of the United Nations in New York. I was there myself, speaking on that occasion about exactly this. And surely the position that we should adopt as a member of the United Nations, a member of the Security Council, is to support the General Assembly decision and support the Security Council appointment, the continued appointment of MINURSO and of a General Secretary's appointee to try and bring about a process to demonstrate for the future. The member for Shrewsbury seems to be using the economic argument of Morocco's huge economic advances that have been made as a reason for overriding international law in respect of the Western Sahara. I'd respectfully say to him, the two things are not connected. What Morocco develops, Morocco's trade with Europe, the developing solar economy in Morocco, the proposal for building an underground train tunnel from Spain into Morocco, and all those sort of things are great developments and very welcome. There are many things in Morocco that are extremely welcome and very good developments, but that doesn't take away the fundamental point that the occupation of the Western Sahara on the departure of Spain is illegal, remains illegal, and we should not be trading in goods that are being produced in illegally occupied territories. The argument goes on all around the world. And so what I hope, Mrs. Vaz, comes out of this debate is a statement by our government that we will continue to respect international law, that we will continue to engage with both Morocco and the Polisario, and that we will engage assertively with the United Nations to ensure that this very long-running conflict can be brought to a conclusion by giving the Sahrawi people a right, a fundamental right to decide their own future. You can suppress it, you can wish it away, you can hope it goes away, but that desire for recognition, that desire for self-determination of the Sahrawi people, as with peoples all around the world, will not go away. Yes, of course.
Very positive points. Is he aware that on the 7th of December 2022, the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury led a debate here in Westminster Hall in which he called for the Chagos Islanders to be given a referendum so that they could exercise their right of self-determination on their future autonomy?
Indeed, I've listened to the member for Shrewsbury speaking on many occasions in the all-party group on the on the Chagos Islands about the need for the Chagosian people to have a right to decide their own future. That issue is not for debate today, but that issue in law is that the Chagos Islands are part of Mauritius. That is decolonisation law that has been enacted. And so I would just say that let's be consistent about this. Let's be consistent about this and ensure that we, as a parliament representing a country that was one of the founding members of the United Nations, that set up many of these international institutions, stand by them, abide by them, and give the Sahrawi people the chance to decide their own future. The camps in Algeria, I've been there a very long time. I visited those camps on, I think, 3 occasions and met many people there who are sad. They've been driven out of their own homes, sad they can't return, doing their best to make a life there. And people stuck in a refugee camp for decades and decades, generations of them, get very angry. Look at people such as Palestinian people in refugee camps in countries all around Israel. They get very, very angry. The way to deal with that anger is to look at the issue of justice, which has been denied. And so I think it's actually in the interests of Morocco to ensure there is a proper settlement and not allow the commercial interests of the phosphate mining or the commercial interests of the agricultural sector or those that wish to occupy the Western Sahara at the expense of the Sahrawi people to take centre stage in our policy making when our policy making should be decided by the issues of decolonisation and law.
Just put the question, because I should have done that before the first speaker, and the question is that this House has considered government policy on the recognition of Western Sahara as Moroccan. Remen Chisti.
Thank you, Mrs. Vance. Can I just say it's a real pleasure to speak in today's debate, and I thank the honourable member for Shrewsbury in securing today's debate. By way of declaration, I was a former Foreign Office Minister, former envoy for the Prime Minister on International Religious Freedom, based in the Foreign Office, and I have a keen interest in foreign affairs. And I said at the very outset, I've never been to Morocco and to that part of the world, and what I say is based on what I read, but not having been to that part of the world. Can I say this? When one looks at the debate title, Government Policy on the Recognition of Western Sahara as Moroccan, the first question I would ask the Minister is this: when was the government position on Western Sahara last reviewed? When was it last reviewed? The question I ask the Minister is in relation to this. It's important to be able to look at different challenges around the world with the latest information available. And therefore, there must be a process to say, we have reviewed this. This is our United Kingdom's position. And it is in line with what we've said before in the Foreign Policy, Defence and Security Review of 2021. And therefore, the question then is, and everyone wants to know for transparency purposes, how do we make those decisions? What criteria do we take into account? And I say at the very outset, I'm not going to get involved into the political arguments that we've seen from members from both sides. And I respect colleagues across the board and the point of international law. I did resign from government as the former envoy for religious freedom over the internal market bill, because I did not agree with breaching international law. So I have huge amount of respect, and I'm a stickler for a rules-based system. The question also I have for the, which I want to make is, the Prime Minister said at the Mansion House speech, the United Kingdom will lead the world and not be led. And that means addressing some of the big issues around the world, rather than simply allowing them to be frozen conflicts. We will lead. The United Kingdom and France chairs the UN Trusteeship Council, which looks at transitional governments and arrangements around the world. So we have a key role to play in that regard. But for today's purposes and today's debate, the question I asked the Minister is this. Having last week attended a presentation in Parliament organised by my right honourable friend, Sir for North Somerset, who chaired a seminar on Morocco along with the ambassador for Morocco, at which a presentation was given on Western Sahara and the Falkland Islands, similarities in their international legal status, by Professor Mark Weller, who's been referenced before as Chair of International Law and International Constitutional Studies at Cambridge University. The former senior mediation expert and advised the United Nations in that regard. And I just want to ask the Minister this. Has the Minister seen that executive summary? And if I may just reference a couple of points in that. The executive summary, it's about 6 pages long, and the first part is this. The study reviews the similarities and differences in the respective legal positions of Argentina and the United Kingdom in relation to the Falkland Islands on one hand, and Morocco, and in relation to the Western Sahara on the other. More specifically, the study investigates whether UK support for the position of Morocco on Western Sahara, and in particular the autonomy settlement proposal put forward by Morocco in 2007, would negatively affect Her Majesty's government's position vis-à-vis the Falkland Islands, Malvinas. Toward this end, the study investigates the two principal branches of the claims advanced by sides in both cases. These are underlying territorial claims to sovereignty and claims or arguments based on decolonization and self-determination. And it would be thought that the positions of Argentina and Morocco are quite similar. Both oppose what they claim to be the forcible acquisition of territory by a colonial power. Britain in one case and Spain in the other, during the period of high imperialism in the 19th century. Both seemingly demand restoration of this territory now that the colonial period has concluded. Hence, it might be thought supporting the Moroccan position or settlement proposal would automatically undermine the United Kingdom's arguments concerning the Falkland Islands. In fact, the position relative to Western Sahara and the Falkland Islands are significantly different in several respects. Endorsing the one does not distract from the other. More and perhaps surprisingly emerges that the United Kingdom actually shares a number of interests and the positions with Morocco. There are 32 different paragraphs on this, Mrs. Vaz, and I just want to go to the end 2 paragraphs on this, because I know other honourable members want to speak in this regard. So paragraph 31 says, while the United Kingdom has already achieved full self-governance for the people of the Falkland Islands, Morocco's autonomy proposal is rapidly gaining broad international acceptance as the means of realising that prospect for the people of Western Sahara. This is also reflected in the increasing demand of the United Nations Security Council, General Assembly and the UN Secretary-General that the sides in the Western Sahara dispute must now engage in dialogue without preconditions with a view to concluding a realistic, serious, credible and enduring settlement. And the final part on that paragraph is this: supporting the adoption and implementation of the proposal is very much in line with the UK position, which emphasises the application of self-determination also outside of the traditional colonial context. Much like Moroccan autonomy proposal, HMG is asserting that full self-government, freely endorsed by the affected people, is the ultimate aim of self-determination in such circumstances. And the last three lines are, this is precisely what Morocco is offering for further discussion to the population of Western Sahara, along with the opinion of a free and fair endorsement of the plan through a referendum among the original indigenous population of territory. What I say to the Minister is this. That is one view. The Right Honourable Member for Islington has put forward another. Can the Minister put forward, so that everyone can see all the evidence available, and then show the United Kingdom's position on this matter? Because if the Prime Minister's vision is to be enacted, and ministers must take steps to look at finding solutions and lead rather than be led with regards to these events in that regard. And so I'd ask the Minister, if he hasn't read that report, will he read that report by Professor Weller and other pieces of evidence, and then highlight when this matter was last reviewed? Because if it hasn't been reviewed for a number of years, it may be something that needs to be put on the Foreign Secretary's desk. Thank you.
To serve under your chairship. I'm going to first of all thank the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury and Atcham for securing this debate. It is indeed a privilege to speak in this debate, and especially look forward to making a contribution. The importance of this topic cannot be understated. In my time here, and I see others in this room who are equally advocates for human rights issues, and I wish to speak on that. I've been an advocate for human rights issues for every individual in this world for quite some time now, for I believe it is an obligation that I carry. It's an obligation that others in this chamber carry today, and those who have intervened so far and spoken so far have indicated that. During conflict, human rights violations abound, and the conflict in the Western Sahara is no exception. So I wish to speak on that, if I could, and just seek, as I always do, the Minister's response. I know the Minister and I share a similar faith, a similar obligation, and I know that he has the power as Minister to respond to all our requests. So I look forward very much to his contribution. I'm also very pleased to see the two Shadow Ministers in their place, and if I can say, the lady Shadow Minister for the Labour Party, who she and I share the same platform on nearly every issue in this chamber, and it is indeed a pleasure, and I look forward very much to hearing the Honourable Lady's contributions as well. The situation in the Western Sahara has been deemed a frozen conflict due to decades of war and the failed peacemaking between Morocco and the Polisario Front. The past 4 years have witnessed an escalation of the conflict since the front declared an end to the ceasefire that had previously kept tensions at bay since 1991. The reality today on the ground is very different. While the question of the status of the Western Sahara remains at the centre of the conflict, I'd like to take the time to address the human rights violations of the Western Sahara conflict that have not received, unfortunately, the proper awareness and action that's warranted. And again, I look to the Minister to take my comments and comments of others on board and respond. And I know that he will, but I urge him to recognise the problems that are on the ground. I am grateful that this debate allows myself and others the opportunity to speak on these violations. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland must be very clear on the need for advocacy and effective action towards mitigating the current human rights crisis in the Western Sahara. The ongoing fighting has resulted in the displacement and the refugee status of upwards of 165,000 Sahrawis, most of them residing in refugee camps that sit on the border between Morocco and Algeria. According to the Algerian government, the UN provides assistance to some 90,000 refugees, and the conditions of these refugees are deplorable. And others in interventions have made that comment, and I wish to do the same, because I think it's right and only right that I should do so. I think the Honourable Gentleman wishes to intervene.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. I thank him for giving way. Would he not agree that actually one of the most essential things for any resolution of any conflict is economic development and the reduction of the inequalities between the richest and the poorest?
Absolutely.
And to that effect, would he not agree that what the Moroccan government has done so far in taking $1 in tax and returning $7 back to the people of the region would actually help in that regard? and that the autonomy proposals will also should be clearly considered within the context of the economic development. I'm one of the very few MPs in this place that's been to Laayoune. I know many others here who have spoken today have, but I've seen for myself the effect of that economic development on the Sahrawi people and how it can benefit. And to end conflict, would you not agree we need more economic development? The Moroccan government's providing just that.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his intervention? Yes, wholeheartedly agree with you. I'm going to refer to some of that shortly. I think it's really important that idle hands, by their very nature, create problems. So they do need a focus, they do need an economic opportunity, and they do need the investment, and they do need to have the human rights and violations stopped and done away with. Over 80% of Sahrawi refugees are food insecure, or at least face the risk of food insecurity, the very issue that the Honourable Gentleman is referring to. 60% are economically inactive. That's the size of the magnitude of the issue. And a third of those refugees have no income whatsoever. So you've got to address those issues at the very core. If you want to solve problems, you've got to address the key issues. As my party's health spokesperson, I must remark on the health situation in those refugee camps, where acute malnutrition rose from 7 to 11% between 2019 and 2022, and many women and children suffer from anemia. Those are key issues, and if those key issues are not recognised as part of the solution, then we have a serious problem. I give one example of one lady, just to illustrate that if I can. The name of the lady is Buna Mohammed, a refugee and a mother of 2 children, residing with her family at one of those camps, and she remarked, "Life is tough here. We are very poor and everything is expensive. We spend the day drinking tea and dreaming of better times." In essence, these refugees reside in conditions that do not provide them with promising opportunities and the dignity that they deserve. Instead, they wait with little optimism for a political solution to the conflict, the very issue that the Honourable Gentleman, who has just left the Chamber now in his intervention, referred to. For those who remain in Moroccan and Polisario-controlled territories, the human rights situation is also a cause for grave concern. According to Freedom House Index, Western Sahara received a 4 out of 100 on freedom in the territory. My goodness, could hardly be much worse, could it? If that's what when it comes to freedom, and you're 4 out of 100, then you're really at the bottom of the pile. So it illustrates, I believe, the issue that needs to be addressed. Political and civil liberties are severely restricted by both Morocco and the Polisario Front. It is worth noting that restrictions on freedom of expression and media freedom are the most prominent ongoing human rights violations. In 2021, UN experts called on Morocco to stop targeting human rights defenders and journalists who are raising awareness of human rights issues in the Western Sahara. And many of these human rights activists face long sentences in Moroccan prisons and even degrading treatment and torture. I think the Honourable Gentleman in his intervention earlier on referred to that as well, and it's something that can't be ignored. The Polisario Front is also known for regularly, and there's not everybody stands above the ridicule here or the finger pointing, for regularly cracking down on any dissent and imprisoning opponents. Our concern is that human rights situation in the Western Sahara will continue to worsen if the United Kingdom and its allies do not take concrete action. So again, I look to the Minister for the response in relation to that. The UK continues to support UN-led efforts in seeking conflict resolution and stability in the Western Sahara. In 2023, UK ratified the UN Security Council resolution which calls for cooperation in achieving a just, lasting and mutually acceptable political solution. So it has to be one that all sides can buy into. It has to be one that gives hope and a promise and a confidence for the future. This resolution also requested the Secretary-General and his personal envoy to facilitate negotiations between Morocco and the Polisario Front. Maybe the Minister in his response could indicate has there been any opportunity for that and how has that went? I believe in my heart, Madam Chair, that any political situation must address the humanitarian conditions that I previously mentioned, especially those of the refugees. I am grateful to the Minister, and I put it on record, and Government for encouraging the efforts of the Envoy and regularly engaging in discussions with the Government of Morocco. Now it is vital that these efforts be broadened and deepened, with human rights taking a central role. The United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland cemented its position as a leader in the human rights advocacy worldwide. We recognise that the need to guarantee human dignity for every individual extends beyond our borders. It is my conviction, Madam Chair, that we must do more to promote human rights in the Western Sahara, calling out abuses of human rights and working for change constructively and positively. So I call on the Minister and Government to be strong voices for the human rights crisis and the needs that are there. I conclude with this, Madam Chair. Our world is increasingly marked by international crisis. The situation in the Western Sahara has been, up until now, a low priority, considering quite obviously our preoccupation with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the war in Gaza. The ongoing conflict in the Western Sahara has become a forgotten conflict amongst the international community. However, we in this House must be the ones who do not forget those who suffer from restrictions on their most basic of rights. Let us reinvigorate our efforts in this chamber today in not only supporting a permanent and peaceful political solution, but also being a leader in advocating for human rights in the Western Sahara. If the debate today achieves that, and I believe, Madam Chair, we have, on behalf of those people who we may never meet, we can be the voice for the voiceless and to help their lives be better ones. Thank you.
Spokesperson Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Ms Vaz. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I congratulate the member for Shrewsbury and Atcham on securing the debate. I'm not, Ms Vaz, the most proficient user of the Hansard search facility, but the results in the system that it's shown me suggests it's nearly 8 years since he last had cause to speak about either Morocco or Western Sahara on the parliamentary record. And until November of last year, I couldn't find any written parliamentary questions at all that he had tabled about the government's relationship or position on issues affecting the countries. But happily, he has come to speak about the experiences that he's recorded on his register of interests. And he's right that it's not uncommon for members to lead or contribute to debates on issues affecting different countries when they have returned for visits. I've done so myself, to Malawi, to Colombia. I think my register of interest will show that the organisations who supported those visits were charitable organisations working for the advancement of human rights, rather than the governments of those countries in pursuit of their own national interests. But whatever the motivation, it has been a useful opportunity to reflect on the situation in what is sometimes referred to as the last colony in Africa. And a number of members, as I think the turnout demonstrates, do take an interest in the area. And I know in particular that the chair of the all-party group on Western Sahara, my honourable friend, the member for Ceredigion, regrets that duties in committee prevent him from taking part today. And we've heard some of the historical background, in fact, a first-hand account of some of that historical background from the member of Islington North. In many parts of Africa, continue to experience the hangovers from the colonial era, although not are as physically manifested perhaps as the berm which runs across Western Sahara, demarcating the area administered by Morocco and the area controlled by Polisario. Yeah.
Very briefly, the member will be aware, I'm sure, that the African Union have always taken the position that Western Sahara is an issue of decolonisation, and it was on that basis that Morocco left the African Union.
Yeah. Yes, he's absolutely right. There's a very long-standing issue that continues to be resolved and has to some extent been frozen, and I suppose, at least in some respect, this debate is welcome because it perhaps helps to shift the debate and move it along. But the obligations on Morocco and the other countries that are party to all of this do date to the Geneva Conventions and that post-colonial legacy. But more recently, the Security Council has continued to adopt resolutions, and last year called for a resumption of negotiations and movement towards a just, lasting and mutually acceptable political solution that provides for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. And that is very important because, as the member for Strangford said, if there's a failure to settle these disputes, that can only really lead to further suffering, to bitterness, to grievance and frustration, to political, regional political and military tensions and conflict, and a spiral thereafter. And it is clear, as I think the contributions that we've just heard have made, whether the member moving the debate or indeed the government which paid for his visit to Morocco, like it or not, that Morocco is an occupying power in Western Sahara, and that means it does have obligations under the Geneva Conventions to foster an environment that sustains human rights for all Sahrawi people, regardless of their political persuasion. And that right of self-determination is fundamental. The Saharis are a distinct population group with their own heritage and history and deserve equal rights to peacefully determine their own future, as would any other similar people. Of course, in the Scottish National Party, we come from a proud tradition of advocating self-determination. And, as I said, the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury himself has used the opportunity in Westminster Hall to argue for the right of self-determination of the people of the Chagos Islands, and that they should be allowed to determine their future in a referendum. There have been various different solutions and ways forward. Published, the autonomy plan by Morocco in 2007 has been seen in some quarters as such a basis. But a settlement under the auspices of the United Nations and its representative, I think, would surely have more success and legitimacy, particularly as ultimately any solution needs to be endorsed in a referendum. As a bare minimum, international standards suggest that an autonomous region must have a locally elected government that cannot be abolished by the central state. So an autonomous Western Sahara would have to be free to manage its own affairs without interference from the Moroccan state. And proposals for a system where an executive of such a body was appointed by and responsible to the King of Morocco would not meet that standard. Now, yes, I'm happy to give way.
One of the effects of the lack of autonomous self-government in Western Sahara is that Western Sahara is one of the most climate-stressed places in the world, and it cannot access international climate finance. 200,000 Sahrawis have been driven into the interior of the desert, which is basically unlivable, and even more are in Algeria, in refugee camps, which are constantly flooded, which are in completely unlivable conditions under tents in the summer. Shouldn't, going forward, the Western Sahrawi government be accessed that international climate finance and become part of the international community, as they have got a climate adaptation plan?
Yes, he makes an excellent point, and climate change is causing displacement around the world. And indeed, if the UK government don't want people to make their way here by irregular means, then it is in the UK government's interests to help people who are displaced and oppressed to tackle the climate crisis, to be able to live fulfilling lives in their countries of origin, and to ensure that happens through peaceful, democratically legitimate ways. So, I mean, in some respects, it is slightly remarkable that the government hasn't simply followed the United States in recognising Morocco's claim to sovereignty. And presumably, the Minister won't be announcing a change to that policy in response to today's debate. And that clearly does disappoint some members on the Minister's backbenches. I think there are some members on the Conservative benches who give the impression they would quite happily outsource the UK's entire foreign and defence policy to the United States, irrespective of who makes up the government of the USA at any given time, just as at the same time they would happily withdraw from the global conventions, treaties and charters that have maintained stability and defended human rights for the past 80 years or so. And I appreciate that makes it difficult sometimes for FCDO ministers to call for the observation of international law and respect for the decision of global bodies which uphold and interpret that law, because many of their colleagues in other departments are running around insulting international tribunals and dismissing them as foreign courts that the UK doesn't need to give heed to. Or indeed, sometimes the FCDO itself decides it doesn't like the findings of such tribunals, such as the ICJ's opinion on the status of the Chagos Islands. But all that said, the UK is wise in this instance to support the UN Security Council's resolutions relating to Morocco and Western Sahara, the calls for self-determination and the calls for freedom of expression and association in Western Sahara. Of course I could wait.
He's repeatedly referring to the United Nations and other organisations. Will he recognise that 100 countries who are members of the United Nations, and bearing in mind there are about 195 countries in the world, but over 100 countries affiliated with the United Nations recognise and support the Moroccan autonomy plans for Western Sahara? Does he recognise that figure at the least?
Well, he made that point in his contribution, but I think the point is that the people of Western Sahara, the Sahrawi people, have to endorse whatever the ultimate autonomy arrangement is. And so the UK government is right to use not just the opinions of countries who are members of the United Nations expressing their views, but using the processes of the United Nations to reach determined conclusions. But the government also has to work back those words up with action, and in particular it needs to be careful about the consequences of trade or other commercial arrangements that it enters into or which it allows others to enter into, and it will be aware of the European Court of Justice's decisions to annul trade deals between the EU and Morocco which did not have consent from people in Western Sahara. And the Minister will have seen my own WPQs recently, not least about the UK-Morocco Strategic Framework for Global Cooperation on Climate Action, Clean Energy and Green Growth. And it's important that that framework and any other bilateral agreements do not infringe the rights to self-determination of people in Western Sahara, or are seen to tacitly or otherwise endorse any unilateral claim or declaration of sovereignty made by Morocco. So the UK government's position has to be for a peaceful, democratic and negotiated settlement agreed in a referendum. And that could be a form of autonomy, it could be full independence, which would include obligations by definition on a new nation state in Western Sahara to abide by the highest standards of democracy and peaceful international relations. Many of us in the SNP often say that independence is defined by our interdependence, the word the member for Shrewsbury used, our peaceful coexistence and cooperation with other countries on the global stage, respecting the framework of the rules-based international order. But at the end of the day, as we said, it has to be for the people there to decide. It's not for the government of Morocco, the United Kingdom government, and it's certainly not for commercial or economic interests of any individual government or mining company or multinational conglomerates to determine the future. Sovereignty, as we often say in the SNP, must lie with the people, and that is the principle that the UK government should seek to uphold, even perhaps against its instincts and its interests, not just in Western Sahara, but around the world.
Opposition spokesperson Lynn Brown.
Very grateful, Mrs. Vaz, and it's a real genuine honour to serve under you as chair. I think it's my first time. If it's not, it's been a long time. Can I thank the honourable member for Shrewsbury and Atcham for bringing forward this debate. We've not had a proper debate in this place on the situation in Western Sahara since 2016, so I'm glad that we can rectify that today at least. And I want to start by emphasising the importance of UK partnerships in North West Africa. The opposition strongly values our relationships with Morocco, Algeria and Mauritania. My right honourable friend, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, was in Morocco only last month, and I spent a wonderful month when I was 18 travelling around that beautiful land. If we are elected, Labour will commit to deepening our relationships across the economic and security spectrum. Sadly, the current government has deprioritised these relationships, with no UK Foreign Secretary visiting Morocco since William Hague over 10 years ago. The economic potential of the entire region could offer much greater mutual benefits based on strengthening trade and investment ties, building institutional capacity and developing new partnerships. One example is the prospect of reliable, long-term, clean power imports. Another is the rare overlap between the potential for green hydrogen production and the potash minerals that are common in the region. In the near future, this could allow for fertilisers to be made with lower carbon emissions and provide secure supplies of green hydrogen for export to the UK too. These are areas of huge potential in which our economic and our climate ambitions align. But sadly, as we've heard, much of this mutually beneficial engagement is frustrated by the continued conflict in West Sahara, which impacts on hundreds of thousands of lives. As we know, the status of Western Sahara has remained unclear for almost 50 years now. And it has been more than 30 years since the Security Council resolution that established the promise of a referendum on permanent future status. Sadly, as we know, almost no material progress has been made towards that referendum. The people of Western Sahara have been let down, and the damage to peace, development and prosperity across the region is significant. In 2020, sadly, the ceasefire broke down, resulted in renewed attacks across the line of control. And while the scale of violence has mostly remained sporadic and low level, we have to be clear that the damage done by the status quo is real. There have been civilian casualties, including 1 death and 3 injuries, resulting from a Polisario front mortar attack on the city of Samara in the Morocco-controlled area last October. And there are reports of human rights abuses in both Morocco-controlled areas and the Polisario-controlled Tindouf camps in Algeria. These include allegations of restrictions on freedoms of speech and assembly, arbitrary detention, torture, sexual violence in Morocco-controlled territory, and extrajudicial killings in the Polisario-controlled camps. Sadly, on both sides of the line of control, there are restrictions on access to journalists and UN officials, which make it all the harder for these abuses to be properly investigated and prevented. So let me ask the Minister what steps the government is taking to support access to the entire territory of Western Sahara and to the camps for UN human rights monitors, and the impact of continued ambiguity about the status of the territory has dire costs for the people of Western Sahara. Around 190,000 people are growing up displaced, sad and angry, mostly in Tindouf. Yes.
To the honourable lady in giving way, with regards to that specific point, that everything must be done to find a solution to the Western Sahara issue. Can I ask her this specific question? If in, say, 10 months' time, she's not in opposition but she's sitting on the other side, what would be her government's position with regards to finding a permanent solution to the Western Sahara? Because everyone wants to know the government's position, and also if she's in that position, what will that government do in that regard?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Should I be in the amazing position of being a minister in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, my current brief does not take Western Sahara under its belt. However, who knows what the future may bring? But I do tell him that we would be looking very clearly, because as I've said just now, that the status quo is damaging. And I think it damages British interests as well as the interests of North Africa. Generation after generation are living with precious little opportunity, almost entirely dependent on humanitarian aid, and understandably angry at how badly they've been let down. And I believe that we need to recognise the potential for terrorist groups to exploit the situation. The security of Mauritania and Algeria are threatened by the worsening instability and violence that continues to plague the Sahel. And the constant tensions and distrust caused by the Western Sahara is making it harder for our partners to work together against the increasingly common threat of terrorism and jihadist insurgency. So I'd like to ask the Minister if he'll update us on this. Is the Department working towards an updated assessment of the risk of terrorism generated by the situation in Western Sahara? And while this limbo continues, the people living in Western Sahara are denied opportunities to develop their skills and their economic resources, which could turn poverty into prosperity, drawing on the region's vast resources, from minerals to fish to renewable energy. As the Minister knows, there are many question marks about the potential legality of trade and investment by UK companies that cut across the disputed territory. I hope the Minister will be able to set out what work is being done to address these ambiguities. Given the scale of both the risks and opportunities, I think that the UK should play a stronger role in supporting both the return to the ceasefire and progress towards a permanent peace. And I fully appreciate the range of views that exist within this House about how that should happen. As we know, there are differing views from our international partners too. There's not yet a consensus on the right way forward. And I believe all of this makes it more important than ever for us to take our lead from international law and to stand up for multilateralism at a time when it is even more contested and undermined. And that's why the Labour Party continues to support the UN-led efforts to achieve a lasting and mutually acceptable political solution that provides for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. That's the starting point, but it's not the end, because we all need to recognise that creative solutions and compromises are going to be necessary to move the dispute forwards after so many years. Diligent diplomacy by UN nations envoys, including the Secretary-General's current personal envoy, has generated compromises which have been sadly rejected, often at the last minute, and this senseless conflict has persisted. And in this context, we need to be wary of those, like Russia and potentially Iran, who look at the continuing insecurity and instability and see opportunities to deepen the chaos and frustrate good faith diplomacy. So we call on our partners to engage constructively in discussions. We need to play our part, supporting creative ideas and building trust between interested parties towards a resolution within international law. I think we can agree across the House that we'd like to see that resolution as quickly as possible.
Minister Rutley.
Thank you, Mrs Vaz. As always, it's an honour to serve with you in the chair, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Shrewsbury and Atcham, on securing this debate. And I'm also grateful for the wide-ranging and quite different opinions that have been expressed today on a complex issue. And of course, I'll work to seek to respond to those points as best I can, and would also just highlight at the beginning, as honourable members will be aware, and I think it's been well set out today, the history of Western Sahara is long and it's complex, and it's marked by instability and by conflict. And in this context, I think it's very important to note that the UK's partnership with the Kingdom of Morocco is indeed historic, as has been pointed out by my honourable friend. It stretches back over 800 years and continues to go from strength to strength, with deepening collaboration across both new and existing areas. This relationship is structured on 4 pillars: diplomatic, security, economic and cultural and education. And the 5th iteration of the strategic dialogue in London will take place shortly. The UK and Morocco are indeed like-minded partners on several foreign policy matters, given the continued unrest in the Middle East following the events on the 7th of October. Both the Foreign Secretary and the Minister of State for North Africa and Middle East, Lord Ahmed, have discussed our shared concerns and avenues for cooperation with Moroccan Foreign Minister Nasser Bourita. King Mohammed VI's role has been influential in providing humanitarian support for Gaza. For example, in March, Morocco sent 40 tonnes of food via the Karem Shalom crossing at His Majesty's instruction. And the UK and Morocco also cooperate multilaterally, for example, at the UN. The UN's got an important role to play in this particular context too. And we're working together in many other areas. For example, on defence, there are over 40 planned defence activities over the year. It includes this year's iteration of exercise Jebel Sahara, a long-running joint military exercise first held in 1989. And on security, we enjoy diverse engagement in many fields supporting our shared interests through training and the exchange of best practices. Talk has been made in this debate about our economic partnership, which is getting stronger by the day. Trade has increased significantly since our association agreement came into force in 2021, bringing total trade to 3.5 billion a year. And the recent appointment of my honourable friend, the member for Aylesbury, as the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Morocco will deliver a further boost. And finally, our partnerships on language and education are increasingly significant aspects of our broader partnership. Others have highlighted the importance of the X-Link Power Project, and indeed we are very interested in this, and we're pleased to see that it's now moved to develop an outline business case. But moving on now to the status of the territory of Western Sahara and the focus of this debate. I give way.
I'm extremely grateful, before he moves on to the next point, to just question him on this issue of security. Clearly, stability in the region is in Britain's national interest in terms of our security. Morocco is a key partner in the interdiction of people smuggling. It's a key partner when it comes to the prevention of illegal migration. It's key in stopping Iranian or IS influence in the region, which would lead to further instability. And many of us therefore find it inexplicable that the government does not follow partners and allies in other countries such as Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, the United States, in recognising that the autonomy plan is the only game in town and the only way that we can actually create progress for those who live in the region and who wish to see not only security and stability, but economic development and eventually democratic progress.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for the points that he's made, and I recognise his interest in this subject and his experience as well. But as I said, we've got a really strong partnership with Morocco. It's built on several pillars, and as I've already highlighted, the fifth iteration of our strategic dialogue in London will happen very shortly. It's a very important partnership to us. Honourable members will, as I said, be aware that this history of what's gone on in Western Sahara is long, complex, and it's really tragically marred by instability and conflict. Since 1963, it's been defined by the UN as a non-self-governing territory without a defined administering power. A resolution to this issue of its status, in keeping with the UN Security Council's commitment, which I will come to shortly, has yet to be achieved. And we've long supported efforts to find a solution, including the initiation of a ceasefire brokered by a then newly established UN peacekeeping mission for Western Sahara, MINURSO, in 1991, bringing to an end decades of violent conflict. As repeatedly enshrined in the United Nations resolutions, the UN Security Council retains, I quote, a commitment to assist parties to achieve a just, lasting and mutually acceptable political solution based on compromise, which will provide for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara, end quote. The UK has consistently supported UN efforts to realise this commitment, approving UN Security Council resolutions, renewing MINURSO's mandate and supporting the current and previous personal envoys to the Secretary-General. The UK's position, therefore, is aligned with our status as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, which informs our desire to see such a solution achieved under the auspices of the UN's political process. The UK believes that this is the best and probably the only way to secure a long-lasting and just settlement which all sides could accept. And as honourable members are aware, in 2021, the UN appointed Mr. Stefan de Mistura as the UN Security General's personal envoy to Western Sahara, whose mandate derives from the Security Council's commitment to Western Sahara. We welcome his recent visits to the region, and indeed Lord Ahmed met with the personal envoy in March to support these UN-led efforts. The UK also supports the work of MINURSO, the UN peacekeeping mission to the Western Sahara, and in particular its vital and ongoing work on demining. The UK's position is also balanced across several core national and political interests, and it's based on our political judgment on how best to protect these interests. It's critical that we support the principle of self-determination, and we're strongly committed to this principle and the right for people to decide their own futures as enshrined in the UN Security Council resolutions about Western Sahara. Honourable members have also referred to the Moroccan autonomy plan. The UK has not commented publicly on this plan, but this is not a judgment on its merits or otherwise. However, I can assure this House that the UK would, of course, warmly welcome any solution which can secure the support of all parties to resolve this dispute. Other colleagues have mentioned points around Professor Weller's legal study and have asked about whether our position is reviewed, and I can confirm to members that our position on the Western Sahara is constantly reviewed. I have personally not reviewed the study by Professor Weller, but I understand that officials in FCDO are aware of it and will review it in due course. And it's in... I just want to say one final thing. It's in regard to the UK's position on Western Sahara that officials would examine and consider the report and its analysis.
Noting the considerable interest in this matter, the line that the matter is constantly reviewed doesn't say anything. The question that I asked the Minister is this, and if he doesn't have the answer, if he can go back to the Foreign Office and then put it in the library, when was the position reviewed last on the issue of Western Sahara? And will the Foreign Office review that position again after this debate in Parliament and in line with all the evidence submitted, including Professor Weller? Because the position to say it's constantly reviewed does not answer the point for members of Parliament.
Well, it may not answer it to his satisfaction, but I can assure him that this position is constantly reviewed, and I have also highlighted our stance on other proposals that have been put forward as well. I'm conscious of time, and what I would like to just say I will, but I want to. The reason I want to move on quickly is to talk about humanitarian issues, which. Yeah. Because my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, is very committed on this subject, and also on the issue of freedom of religion or belief. And I am also very, very clear that we want to help promote and protect human rights worldwide, including in Western Sahara and in the Tindouf refugee camps. Human rights forms part of our regular bilateral dialogue with Morocco, and we raise concerns with the Moroccan authorities as appropriate. And the UK provides humanitarian assistance to the Tindouf refugee camps via our contributions to UN bodies, such as the World Food Programme. In conclusion, our relationship with Morocco is important and growing. Morocco is stable, friendly, an important country in the region, undergoing positive economic and socio-economic reforms, guided by His Majesty King Mohammed VI. We look forward to developing our relationship further and convinced that finding a solution to this issue in Western Sahara would unlock enormous potential, not just for Morocco, but for the whole region, as has been said on both sides of the House today. As for the issue of Western Sahara, we strongly believe that the UN process is the best and, as I said, perhaps only way to solve this long-standing dispute in a manner acceptable to all sides, and we would urge all those with a genuine interest in seeking a resolution to this dispute to lend their support to it. That remains the best way to deliver a sustainable, just and prosperous future for the people of Western Sahara. Thank you.
Daniel Kaczynski.
I'm very grateful, Mrs. Vaz, for the opportunity of having this debate and obviously, which has encompassed some rather different views and objectives from various colleagues and parliamentarians. I speak as one of the Prime Minister's trade envoys, and of course for me exports are one of the most important things because it's hard currency coming into the United Kingdom. We've just become the world's 4th largest exporter, and I think I'm extremely concerned that in my written parliamentary questions to ministers, there is no UK export finance facility for Western Sahara because of the ongoing conflict. And during my visit to Dakhla and Layoun, I met with many British companies who are in tourism, construction, engineering, and many other sectors, wanting to invest in Western Sahara. That is not possible because UK export finance is prevented from affording credit facilities for Western Sahara. That is why it's so important for us to resolve this issue, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity of lobbying the Minister today.
The question is that this House has considered government policy on the recognition of Western Sahara in as Moroccan. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.